Hey, welcome back to my channel. If you have been watching me for a while and you are used to seeing me put out insight videos on Wednesdays and Saturdays and beats on Fridays and remixes on Sundays, at some point when I was doing those, I was making these things called titles, is what I call them. They're basically my book reviews. I'm going to start doing those now, and I'm going to do pretty much like only those, and I'm going to work on the other ones when I get a chance to. Involving, one of those is going to be an insight video about what's going on in my life right now and why I decided to just stake my claim and only focus on titles for now. But until then, Bad Blood by John Carreyrou. I bought this book because of the title. Silicon Valley, if you don't know, is very techie. Most of the biggest tech companies spawn and explode from this area of California. I knew that many of these companies had very rough beginnings and CEOs who faced brutal degrees of adversity as a result of their decisiveness. And what initially came off as cold-blooded tempers, I knew this from books like The Four by Scott Galloway, talking about the four biggest, most powerful companies in the world, what they have in common, and why and how they got to where they are, the Elon Musk biography by Ashley Vance, and Steve Jobs by legendary biographer Walter Isaacson, which is repeatedly mentioned in this book, and I feel is honestly just a macrocosmic example of how this book would turn out if the bad blood it spoke of was both so bad and good that it unquestionably just ended up putting a dent in the universe that is still growing at the making of this video. I always admired capitalism. I always knew it was never perfect. I eventually learned that CEOs of companies like The Four, Facebook, Apple, Amazon, and Google always felt it's fair to scrutinize power more the more it grows. And I think the title really hooked me because of that. The unnaturally optimistic side of me looks more at the good that these companies have done, but the naturally pessimistic side of me always understood that by doing that, I run the risk of assuming they're not imperfect. And I got this book to educate myself on what really goes wrong behind the scenes that a big company isn't telling people about, especially in Silicon Valley. Because, you know, maybe I want to start a company, or you do like that someday, but maybe you or I want to do it without having to do stuff like that. And maybe you or I want to prove that it's possible to do such a thing and not ultimately fail. But ultimately, a failure in that venture would be not learning what not to do. So that's why I got this book. A summary. The great thing about books like this is that they give access to outsiders so we can really hear from experts and reporters what the fuck is really happening as it happens. The notes he uses are completely true, with the exceptions of the pseudonyms he gives to some of the 100 people he interviewed. If you interview 100 people for a book about a Silicon Valley startup, chances are you're on a mission, okay? But the quotes from the book are verbatim from emails and texts. He begins by telling the story of Elizabeth Holmes and her company Theranos. They created this little thing with so much shit went into this. It ended up being called the Edison. Later in the book, there was one that was supposed to be way better called the 4S, named of course after the iPhone 4S. The Edison, and I guess the 4S too, were designed for pharmaceutical companies to take and test blood samples. And of course, so much went into making it because when you go into a market like biotech, the barrier to entry is interesting. And the price, like many other technology-based industries, involves more than just money. Then of course he talks about Apple and the associations between Elizabeth and the now trillion-dollar Cupertino-based company, like comparisons to Steve Jobs, saying the Edison is like the iPod of medical devices and every household will have one. Lots of people were fired left and right throughout the whole book, like constantly. Holmes was quite the personality. She was very bubbly and passionate, but you didn't want to get on her bad side. She would get really angry at lots of things, but she would just get angry. I feel like it's one of those things where a person is so wrapped up in the things that piss them off that it doesn't even occur to them that the reason, cause, or effect even matters to other people. And if you can't see how this negatively affects a startup in Silicon Valley, well, keep watching. For example, there were two major investors or people in the company in Chapter 4 who agreed to remove her as CEO and temporarily replace her until they could permanently replace her. They went in to tell her their decision, but then, within 2 hours of that moment, she convinced them to do the complete opposite. She agreed that she was too immature to run the company and that she would change. She would be more responsive and transparent going forward. Now, what's extraordinary about this is that lots of older founders in her position wouldn't have been able to do anything like that. The thing is though, when you strike at the king, you gotta fucking kill the king. Or I guess queen, in this case. But they didn't. And that's why she fired one of them first and the other a couple weeks later. I like to think that you can compare her to Steve Jobs in the sense of creating what is called, and I've heard this mentioned in so many different books at this point, a reality distortion field where you deeply influence a person or people to act in ways they normally wouldn't because you so magnetically project this dramatized version of your great what could be reality that it distorts in that moment their view of it. This requires an insatiable amount of charisma, and the most polarizing people I've studied are the ones who seem to have figured out how to do it effortlessly. Now, a huge problem of hers was that she really just wanted to commercialize a product that wasn't ready for the market, and this is somewhere you cannot compare her to Steve Jobs. So many people were drawn to Theranos because of the way it publicly conducted itself, that people left Apple, NASA, SpaceX, and I think even Microsoft just to go work there. But a majority, if not all of them, either quit or were fired. Something I don't like about books like this is that there were so many characters through the whole thing that it's just kind of difficult to keep track of them all. What I noticed that kind of separates this book from a lot of those, however, is that the characters worth remembering are the ones talked about the most, or I guess in this case the ones who weren't fired or quit for the longest period of time. But this book kind of makes that clear through their actions. Like her boyfriend, Sonny. He was a lot older than her. He was like 2 decades older than her. And he was the executive vice chairman, whatever that means, of Theranos. He didn't really dress or act like someone who was going to work every day. He just kind of dressed and acted like someone who was going to a nightclub every single day. But whenever anyone wanted to complain to Elizabeth about him, she would just walk to the back of the building with him, where people jokingly remarked that they were busy there snorting lines of cocaine. After some time, one of Elizabeth's best friends, even, eventually got tired of working with Sonny, and she had other reasons for leaving. Elizabeth was like,
okay, go. And don't say goodbye to anyone. We don't trust you.
I don't like Sonny. I really didn't like him. I feel like he was a really mean character. If you get this book, I don't think you will either. Every time the author mentioned him, I was like, okay, here comes the drama queen who has a dick. Walgreens was pitched the idea of Theranos by Elizabeth and Sonny, and the guy was like, this is revolutionary! This is a game changer that we need! And, well, what happens with that, which involves leveraging both the fear of missing out and Walgreens' biggest competitor, that most of the things they do actually revolved around their act of destroying. That's explained in the book, too. What's impressive to me about the author's writing style is that it really is not biased. What's more impressive, if anything, is, if it is, his knack for hiding it. Well, for most of the book. He talks about the venture of Theranos into medical testing for the military. This involved the FDA and a general whose bad side you didn't want to be on. The general once said, for example, to a long line of Marines,
be polite, be professional, and have a plan to kill everyone you meet.
Bad Blood really exemplifies the short, medium, and long-term consequences of leading a company, organization, or really anything based on fear, lies, and intimidation, as opposed to transparency, trust, and communication. If you want to explore books about companies that operate on values more like the latter 3 I just mentioned, I recommend checking out Made in America by Sam Walton, the Walmart founder, and The House That Jack Ma Built about Alibaba, which is basically, if you don't know, it's like the Amazon of China. For a while, most of the insiders who knew how fucked up everything was couldn't find a way to get it through to the public, and the increasing amount of increasingly important people getting involved in it, like seasoned Silicon Valley investors and government officials. That's how big this was. Because those people may have been one reason, but it wasn't the main reason. The main reason was way crazier. On top of this, whoever supported the company in general was sucked into this big vision. It was like a collective reality distortion field of like
this little piece of technology
that will
completely transform healthcare.
They also admired Elizabeth because, well, she was very, very polarizing. For every bit of bad in her, there was something of what I would call as promising and equivalent. Many of them were also older, and had seen the anticipation of something like this build up for decades before one company finally stood up and rose to the top. One of 39, or shortly after 100, of what were called unicorns in a well-known publisher's article, to be valued in, I think in 2013, at $6 billion, with both Spotify at $4 billion and Uber at $3 billion, behind them. It grew like a winning horse that nobody realized was actually kind of just on a lot of steroids and not really a horse. Or better yet, the quote, "The way Theranos is running is that it's like building a bus while trying to drive the bus. Someone is going to get killed. If you don't believe this, someone actually kills themselves after their dealings with this company." That is talked about in the book, as well as the growing stigma, or I guess worry, with good logic of course, of the potential killings from one perspective, or deaths from another, of customers who were actually kept secrets from, and lied to as well, about drastically false blood test results they got back from the devices. If you look up Elizabeth Holmes at the release of this video, you will probably see many news stories about her being charged for fraud, and she will have been going to trial for it in mid-2020. The absurdity of the rest of this story, especially where the author got involved, reminded me of the whole series of Ted Bundy cases me and probably many other millennials learned about after watching that Netflix special with Zac Efron, where one person, you know, like maybe a serial killer, or I guess maybe a normal guy who was just in law school, is brought to the attention of a great population, followed by a sequence of court cases that gave the population increasing amounts of evidence and other information, only to leave them feeling one way, another way, or so ambivalent toward the entire situation that it almost seems like they're better off spending more time thinking about their personal concerns than what's on the news. If you're watching this, that might be you. Whether or not that's the case, it's definitely me. But I really appreciate books like this, because if it is you, then I have found that people criticize us, sometimes you and me, for reasons that involve their values. If you're not helping it, you're hurting it. If you're not hurting it, you're helping it. And when it becomes part of our actual circles of concern, that is where it is important to learn from such pieces of history as this one. The same people who criticize us are probably the same type of people who will also say that history repeats itself. But I agree with Mark Twain. It doesn't repeat itself. It just rhymes. There's only one quote that I really got from this. "Those who the gods destroy, they first make mad." Direction 1. I recommend this book for anyone who tends to trust companies, or people, or governments in power, and thinks, well, it's okay, you know? It's Apple, it's Facebook, it's Obama, it's Bernie, it's Trump. They got our backs. I also recommend this book for people who are easily influenced by others. If you are easily influenced by others, especially against your own judgment, this book may hit you with the angles that other books just kinda haven't, and give you more of a reason to be skeptical of what causes them to influence you against your own judgment. In the words of Henry Ford, skepticism is the balance beam of civilization. Sure, Henry Ford didn't sound like that. But if your inner civilization is lacking in balance beams, then I recommend you check out this book. Direction 2. If you like this book, I recommend the other books I mentioned in the beginning of this video: Steve Jobs by Walter Isaacson, The Four by Scott Galloway, and Elon Musk by Ashley Vance. Those and The Everything Store by Brad Stone, which is like the premier story of Amazon and Jeff Bezos. Bad Blood by John Carreyrou. There's a link to it in the description if you guys want to check it out and read the reviews. That and all the other books that I mentioned in this video, if you guys are interested in checking those out. If there are any other books that you guys want me to check out and maybe review, please let me know in the comments. If you checked out this book, what did you think? Did you like it? Why did you like it? Did you hate it? Why? I want to spark some dialogue and get to know my audience. But hey, make sure to leave a like if you liked it, subscribe if you haven't already. If you could turn on that little bell to receive a notification every time I drop a new video, that would mean the world to me. Thank you guys so much for watching. You can find me everywhere, and I will see you then.